Nick Saban is the betting favorite to be the next LSU coach. Is this real life? We got to talk about this. Locked on LSU. Here we go.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked On LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We're free, available wherever you get great podcasts. Of course, on YouTube as well, so please subscribe. As always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. So thank you sincerely for that, and thank you for making the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network on the face of planet Earth. We're fired up to be here and glad you are as well. We have a lot to talk about, including new odds for the next LSU head coach. And Nick Saban tops the list. This is almost inexplicable. When the first odds came out, Nick Saban was a distant 75-1. Now, just 2 weeks after Brian Kelly was fired, Nick Saban is 2-1. He's plus 200. That means you bet $100 to win 200. Lane Kiffin's next at plus 375, followed by Joe Brady, Clark Lee, Dan Lanning, and then a whole bunch of others. James Franklin, Jon Sumrall, Brent Key, Jimbo Fisher, Kenny Dillingham, Eli Drinkwitz, Marcus Freeman. But the bottom line is you got Nick Saban at the top of that list. Now, I get it. I get it. Most of you are sitting there rolling your eyes going, Matt, how many times are we going to have to hear this? Nick Saban, I get it, blah, 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 blah. He's 74. Didn't he retire from coaching because he was tired of the NIL and the portal and all that? Yeah. Isn't he doing college game day and he loves it? And, you know, he gets to stay close to the game and make a lot of money and not deal with all the things that drove him away from the game? Yeah. And didn't Miss Terry say that, you know, he's not going back and coaching and they're saying retired? Yeah. And didn't Kristen Saban, his daughter, put on social media how stupid everybody was for talking about Nick coaching again? Yeah, all of that is true. And despite all of that, the one group of people who put out odds, the one group of people who make their projections not rooted in any type of bias are saying, yeah, no, that's real. Keep in mind, odds makers are not LSU fans. Odds makers are not Alabama fans. Odds makers do not care about your school colors. They care about one color, green. All they care about is money. That's how they build big, old, beautiful, expensive buildings out in the desert, because they put out odds and they are trying to generate equal action on both sides of that number. That's the point of making odds. And they are really good at coming up with point spread value and things of that nature. Our friends at FanDuel do an awesome job, and we love talking about them here every day on Locked On LSU. But the point is, if the odds makers are saying that, that's not an LSU fan putting out a list. That's not some national media guy saying, what if this happened? That's not some unnamed report. These are odds makers putting out odds based on information they gather. Now, I want to be very clear about a few things, okay? And we've talked a good bit about the possibility of Nick returning to LSU here. Now, I'll remind you, a couple of things we play. If you're an everydayer, shout out. You've heard some of this already. After Brian Kelly was fired, Paul Feinbaum, bulk of his career in Birmingham, knows Saban well, has for a long time. Paul Feinbaum said this.
Saban wouldn't talk to Penn State. He wouldn't talk to Florida. But I think he would talk to LSU, at least to see what they have to offer. And by the way, sometimes you can come back and make an offer that even a man who will be 74 years old on Halloween might consider. I think it's worth thinking about. And I'm already hearing on our show down here in the South, Alabama fans saying, please tell me it's not true. Don't tell me that Nick Saban's going to LSU.
So he's saying you might listen. Nick Saban on the McAfee show.
When I left LSU, that was probably professionally.
Forgive me. That was Saban on the Pivot. This was Saban on the McAfee Show.
You know, I want to stay retired, and I do not want him anywhere near Miss Terry. Because when she hears some of these numbers, she gets interested. And I ain't interested.
Saban, I ain't interested. Talking about Miss Terry, talking about Jimmy Sexton is who he's talking about. His agent right there. I'll talk more about Jimmy Sexton in just a second. Saban on the pivot, talked about leaving LSU. Biggest regret.
When I left LSU, that was probably professionally the biggest mistake that I ever made. Not because we didn't have success in Miami, because I enjoyed coaching in Miami, but I found out in that experience that I like coaching in college better because you could develop players personally, academically, athletically, and all that a little more than in pro ball. Even though I love the status of coaching in pro football and the kind of guys you coached and you're coaching in the best league against the best players, I loved all that. So then I can't go back to LSU, go to Alabama, and no disrespect to Alabama. It's not Alabama versus LSU. It's just Jimmy Sexton stood on the balcony when I was getting ready to leave LSU, make a decision about whether I went to Miami or stayed at LSU. And he said, what do you want your legacy to be as a coach? Do you want to be Vince Lombardi or do you want to be Bear Bryant? And without hesitation, I said Bear Bryant. And he said, what are you doing going to Miami then? That's true. I don't know if I ever told that story, but that's the truth. We outside of Skip Bertman's office, on the balcony, and I went anyway.
He went anyway. He made an impulsive decision. And there's at least a possibility that Nick Saban could make an impulsive decision again. I'm not sitting here trying to tell you that Nick Saban is going to be the LSU coach. Not telling you that. It's not my role here today. But what I have told you, and there's 2 episodes on this show we have done prior. One was the initial conversation about Nick. 2 was when Shaq made the comments he did a week ago when he was hearing rumblings, right, about Nick Saban possibly returning to LSU. I'd consider the source. It's what I told you. I'm not telling you I think this is going to happen. I'd put it at a 5% chance. I think overwhelmingly the likelihood is Nick Saban stays retired, keeps doing game day, making a bunch of money, staying close to the game, doing college game day without all the hassle. I think that's what's going to happen. But I've told you this before. I know for a fact that Nick Saban has had conversations with people around the LSU program. Verge Osbury, LSU's AD, came on my radio show 1 week ago and says he has a standing conversation with Nick Saban every 2 to 3 weeks. They've talked every 2 to 3 weeks for 20 years. And Verge also said he thinks that ship sailed, that Nick's staying retired. And I believe him. I believe everybody thinks that's the case, that he will stay retired. Nick has a lot of business partners still in Baton Rouge from his time when he was here, a lot of financial dealings he's doing. They have great friends in Louisiana. They've stayed friends with from their time here 20 years ago. And that just might be enough that in the right moment, in another 3 to 4 weeks, if he gets that itch and decides he wants to scratch it, in the right situation with the right people arises, I want to remind you, Nick's agent's Jimmy Sexton. LSU's AD is Verge Osbury. Verge and Jimmy Sexton have a great relationship. Verge and Nick Saban have a great relationship. Nick knows who he'd be working for in Verge Osbury. He knows the lay of the land. You better believe every booster at LSU would line up to give him whatever in the world he possibly wanted to make this a smashing success. Again, I'm not telling you it's going to happen. But I've told you this phrase from the moment Brian Kelly was fired and we started talking about this, and from every coaching search I've ever talked about at LSU. Believe nothing, consider everything. Believe nothing, but consider everything. And if you don't think there's even the slightest chance that in an impulsive moment, Nick Saban might not go, you know what? Darn it, let's do it. You're dreaming. That door, even if ever so slightly, is ajar, because them people out in Vegas, they don't build big, beautiful, shiny buildings out there in the middle of the desert. because they're used to being way, way wrong. They may be way wrong on this. He ain't just on the list as a flyer. He's at the top of the list. And if you're not considering it, you could be blind to what could be the biggest story of this entire offseason in this coaching carousel. So who else is on that list? The other guy at the top is Lane Kiffin. I want to talk about him next. It's Locked on LSU, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Supply House. When the opening whistle blows on a new repair, get your crew moving forward with Supply House. Order today and see parts on your doorstep tomorrow. Over 280,000 plumbing, HVAC, and electrical items from the most trusted brands in the business. Their real-time inventory and honest lead times keep you from punting projects, while their industry-leading customer service always has your blind side covered. Need parts fast for a project? Supply House has next-day delivery. Talk about a game changer. And join the free Trademaster program today and score serious perks like priority shipping, lower prices, and a dedicated support line. Visit supplyhouse.com to sign up for free and use promo code SHCollege5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Real people, real service. And we're brought to you by Our Lady of the Lake, championship health partner of LSU Athletics. You know, I love telling you about Our Lady of the Lake because the folks over at Our Lady of the Lake have become not only great partners, but great friends as well. And in my own personal life, for me and my family, we trust the lake. My son, who's gone on a long health journey that we've talked about many times publicly over the years, we see specialists at Our Lady of the Lake Children's Hospital. And one of the remarkable things about the Our Lady of the Lake Children's Hospital is the fact that you don't have to leave Baton Rouge to get world-class care. Drew's neurologist, Dr. Shaw, love going to see him there. We've seen pediatric surgeons. We've seen pediatric orthopedists. It's an amazing place. My own personal physician, Dr. Curtis Chastain, with the Our Lady of the Lake Men's Health Group, right there at the lake. You can trust the lake just like the world-class athletes at LSU, just like the students do at LSU, and everyday champions like you and me trust the lake. It's Our Lady of the Lake, championship health partner of LSU Athletics. Our Lady of the Lake and LSU. Together, we roar. So Nick Saban is still very much there in play, if you believe the odds. But second on that list beyond Nick Saban is Lane Kiffin at plus 375. And for me, I actually believe Lane Kiffin is the most interesting character in the entire LSU coaching search. Because I believe, based on a lot of conversations I've had in and around this program, that Lane Kiffin is most likely LSU's primary target. I don't believe it's Nick Saban. I believe if Saban wanted the job, they'd take him in a millisecond. As a matter of fact, in the interview I just referenced with LSU Athletic Director Verge Osbury, he told me point blank, if Saban was interested, he said, I'd drive there and pick him up tomorrow. I don't know if that's the case. But Kiffin is fascinating. He's got the second highest odds right there. And he's also a guy who seemingly has a longing eye for something bigger and better. Now, John Talty is a guy that used to work for AL.com. Now he's a national college football writer for CBS Sports. And he was on the Ultimate College Football podcast over at CBS. And he said this about the possibility of Lane Kiffin leaving Ole Miss.
Yeah, trying to predict what Lane's going to do is a dangerous thing. He's someone who I think knows he's going to have a lot of options. And I think this cycle has broken perfectly for Lane, where you have jobs like Florida, LSU, Auburn. Auburn, of course, he came very close to taking a few years back. And then the opportunity, of course, to stay at Ole Miss. So this is something that I think you almost have to watch on like a day-to-day basis as to how things are trending one way or another. I will say that as of November 10th, it is trending, in my opinion, from talking to different people, a little more toward him leaving than staying. But it changes so much day to day that putting a hard prediction on anything Lane may or may not do is probably not a great idea.
Trending toward him leaving, not staying. So here's the interesting thing there's a lot of interesting things about Lane Kiffin. First of all, I do believe that Kiffin would be at the top of LSU's wish list. The odds that we're talking about, however, about Saban being at the top of the odds to be the next LSU coach, Kiffin is also at the top of the odds to be the next Florida coach, and he's at the top of the odds to be the next New York Giants coach. Remember, the Giants just fired Brian Daboll. The Giants quarterback is Jaxson Dart, who transferred to Ole Miss, played under Lane Kiffin, and became the all-time leader in everything at Ole Miss. By the way, Jaxson Dart's dad was on a podcast talking about the possibility of Lane Kiffin coaching the Giants. Give a listen.
As we were texting on our Kiffin Dart family text thread, because there was I think Boomer Esiason, it said something in the media today that maybe they should throw out a potential coaching applicant to Kiffin, and he kind of just sent it over with us like a smirk and just said it's too cold in New York for me. But it's just kind of funny. But we have weekly interactions with him and his family, and it's I think Jaxson holds high regard. Kiffin is one of his most trusted allies, and I think he uses him for advice in a lot of different ways. And so there's constant communication between them, even today, and there's a lot of that between our families.
So one of the things that I often say is actions speak louder than words. If you're an everydayer, you've heard me say it a bunch, shout out. And it's just true in life. That's not just sports. That's everything in life. What you do is more powerful than what you say. And I very much believe that Lane Kiffin is happy at Ole Miss. It's interesting we're just talking about Nick Saban, because I would correlate Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss right now to Nick Saban at LSU in 2004. Nick Saban had everything he wanted. He had won a national title. He had built that program. LSU would have given him anything. They made him the highest paid coach in the country after he won the national championship, which was in his contract. And they would have given him everything and anything he needed to be successful. Boosters had built him, was affectionately referred to as Sabanville, LSU football ops. That was Nick Saban's vision that he never got to actually use because it was completed after he left for Miami. And Nick had everything. His family loved LSU. They loved Baton Rouge. They had lifelong friends. You heard him talk about it. It's his biggest mistake in his career was leaving LSU. It was just at the wrong time because he still had to scratch that NFL itch. And when the NFL didn't pan out, came back to college, the LSU job was filled. He went to Bama and led a decade and a half era of dominance unlike we've ever seen and will likely ever see again in college football. And it feels similar right now at Ole Miss. I said actions speak louder than words, and I want to remind you of this. Lane Kiffin has had a contract extension on the table at Ole Miss, reportedly making him the highest paid coach in the country. Kirby Smart at Georgia makes $13.3 million per year on an average annual value. The reports of the Ole Miss offer for Kiffin is at $13.5 million. And every bit of information I've got from anyone around Ole Miss is that they would match whatever financially anyone's going to pay Lane, they'd match it at Ole Miss to keep him. You realize over the last 5 years, there are 3 programs in the SEC that have won 50 games. Georgia, Alabama, Ole Miss. He's done incredible things there. And he could continue to do incredible things there. They're going to make the playoff this year. But he has had that contract extension on the table, and he hasn't signed it, which tells you that 2 things can be true at the same time. Lane Kiffin can love what he has at Ole Miss. I believe him when he says it's changed his life. He said, I needed Ole Miss more than Ole Miss needed me. For his family, for his personal health, being all that stuff. I believe every bit of that. I believe it's genuine. But he's had that contract extension on the table, and he hasn't signed it, which tells you he's keeping his options open. And if you're keeping your options open, someone's going to make you an offer in a situation that you can't refuse. And that might just be LSU. Now, the fascinating part will be Ole Miss is going to make the playoff. They're going to play Florida this weekend. They're going to blow them out, and they get Mississippi State in the Egg Bowl. Split those games, you're 10-2, you're in the playoff. Now, I don't see a reality where Ole Miss would let Lane Kiffin coach in the playoff if he's leaving for another school. And they would want to know before the playoff if he's staying or going. So it might be a situation where while we're all sitting here debating if LSU would wait for Kiffin until after the playoff, it may not come to that because Ole Miss may look at him and go, you got to make a decision. Are you with us or you're not? If you're with us, come on, let's go. We make you the highest paid coach in the country. We'll give you everything you need. But he may say, you know what? It's time to jump. And he may walk away. It's going to be fascinating if Lane leaves his team before the playoff, which could very well happen. Don't sleep on either of those. Remember, believe nothing, consider everything. Saban, Lane Kiffin, right at the top of the list. Well, who else is on that list for LSU? I want to run through the rest of the odds and a few tidbits that you might find interesting. Don't you move. It's Locked On LSU, your team every day. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So we've gone through Saban and Kiffin, and I kind of want to run through quickly the rest of that list of the betting favorites to be the next LSU coach and kind of a few thoughts on how this may play out. Saban is favored and Kiffin is next. And by the way, something else worth remembering throughout all of this, and regardless of how this plays out, I want you to understand this because this is something that's going to be important, how this all plays out with LSU. When Verge Osbury or any LSU representative is talking to an agent, they're not talking to an agent about one coach. When they're talking to an agent, they're talking to basically a half dozen coaches. For example, look at this list. Nick Saban's on it. Lane Kiffin's on it. Clark Lee is on it. Dan Lanning, Brent Key from Georgia Tech. It's 5 coaches that are all represented by Jimmy Sexton. So you could talk to one guy, Jimmy Sexton, and be talking to 5 coaches on this list. Let's talk about Clint Dowdle. That's a name you probably don't know, but you should, because while he's a young guy, he's a rising star in the agent world. Clint Dowdle represents Jon Sumrall. He represents Kenny Dillingham from Arizona State. He represents Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri. He represents Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame. He represents Mike Elko at Texas A&M. So you talk to Clint Dowdle, you're talking to some big-name coaches. Now, it's worth mentioning that as you go through this list, Saban, Kiffin, 1, 2, who we've talked about. Number 3 on the list is Joe Brady. Now, Joe Brady is represented by Trace Armstrong. Trace Armstrong is also Brian Kelly's agent. So if you wonder the ramifications of all of this hullabaloo with Kelly and LSU not trying to pay his buyout, it could be a thing where it reflects negatively to Trace Armstrong. Like, Trace Armstrong right now is going through a war with LSU to get his client the buyout money he successfully negotiated. Do you think Trace Armstrong's going to be super pumped to go to Joe Brady and say, yeah, you should take the LSU job? Probably not. That's one of those instances where what's going on right now with BK and the buyout could negatively affect your ability to hire your next coach. Now, Clark Lee is at Vanderbilt, and if they win their next 2 games, they're in the playoff. If they end up beating Tennessee in the final playing date, they're in the playoff. It may be hard to get Clark Lee. Dan Lanning is on that list. Now, Dan Lanning on the Rich Eisen show, remember, said this.
I'm not leaving Oregon. Yeah, as long as I win. That's what I always tell my kids, right? If your dad wins, we'll be at Oregon. So I got to win, right? That's how it changes.
He said point blank, I'm not leaving Oregon. I believe him for what it's worth. Jon Sumrall is fascinating because I think he would be a great coach. I just think there's some old guard at LSU that isn't going to want to hire the Tulane coach, as silly as that is. Brent Key, Jimmy Sexton client at Georgia Tech. Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State. He's at his alma mater. But Kenny Dillingham, when asked about LSU, said this.
I'm trying to win as many games as I can here. That is my number one focus, is our players, our football team, everything about us. That's simple. Like, I am so singularly focused on us to win football games, to become a better football team, this season. Like, that's my singular focus.
The old non-denial denial. He didn't give you an answer. He could be on the list. Again, that's a Clint Dowdle client, as are Eli Drinkwitz, Marcus Freeman. I don't think Freeman's leaving Notre Dame. I don't know LSU wants to pay Eli Drinkwitz $11 million to come be the coach. So you start to look at the top of the list. Maybe Saban and Kiffin make more and more sense with every passing day. You know we're going to be talking about it right here on Locked On LSU. Hey, thanks so much for making us your first listen. If you're on podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel. Shout out to everybody on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network, available every Monday through Friday. And let a friend know if they love the Tigers. We got you here every single day for Locked On LSU, your team every day.